Introduction. The world has always been governed by power. If this book has found you, there is a good chance that you have already begun noticing something that most people spend their entire lives ignoring. The world does not operate exactly the way we were taught it does. You may have watched less qualified people rise faster than those with greater talent. You may have seen individuals gain influence without possessing superior intelligence, stronger morals, or even better ideas. You may have wondered why some people seem to shape events wherever they go, while others spend their lives reacting to circumstances they never chose and never fully understand. Most of us were raised to believe that hard work alone creates success, that honesty is always rewarded, and that good intentions naturally produce good outcomes. It is a comforting belief, but history, politics, business, and human relationships tell a far more complicated story. Beneath every conversation, every friendship, every workplace, every family, and every social group exists an invisible force that quietly shapes decisions, influences behavior, and determines who leads, who follows, who wins, and who loses. That force is power. Not the obvious power of wealth, titles, or authority, but the deeper and more subtle power that operates beneath human behavior, often without people realizing it is there. For decades, psychologists and behavioral researchers have revealed that human beings are influenced by forces they rarely recognize, from authority and social pressure to status, persuasion, and manipulation. We like to believe that our choices are entirely our own, yet countless studies suggest that invisible dynamics are shaping far more of our lives than we imagine. This is why awareness matters. Because people cannot defend themselves against forces they do not see, and they cannot change outcomes when they fail to understand the hidden mechanisms producing them. In the chapters ahead, you will discover 30 brutal truths about human nature, influence, ambition, manipulation, hierarchy, and psychological power. Some of these truths may challenge what you believe. Others may explain experiences that have confused you for years. By the time you finish this audiobook, you will not simply understand power as a concept. You will begin to recognize it everywhere, in conversations, relationships, workplaces, conflicts, and most importantly, within yourself. The world has always been governed by power. The only question is whether you can see it. Let us begin. Part 1. The Foundation. How power really works. Understanding the invisible architecture beneath every human interaction. Brutal truth 1. Niceness is often a strategy, not a virtue. I want you to think about the nicest person you know, the one who always smiles, always compliments you, always seems eager to help, never says anything harsh. Now ask yourself, do you actually trust that person with your real secrets? Do you believe everything they say? Or is there a small, nagging part of your brain that finds their relentless pleasantness just slightly off? That instinct is worth examining. Research in social psychology has consistently shown that extreme agreeableness, the kind that never shows friction, never expresses genuine disagreement, never reveals discomfort, is not the signature of a well-adjusted, virtuous person. It is frequently the signature of someone who has learned that niceness is the safest route to getting what they want. In a 2019 study published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences, researchers found a significant overlap between high agreeableness scores and higher rates of indirect aggression, what psychologists call relational aggression. In other words, people who present as maximally nice to your face are statistically more likely to undermine you behind your back, exclude you from social groups, or manipulate your relationships. because direct confrontation is not their tool. Niceness is. This is not to say that kind people are secretly evil. Genuine warmth is one of the most beautiful human qualities. But genuine warmth has a texture to it. It is warm in the presence of conflict, not just in smooth moments. It tells you the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. It shows up consistently, not strategically. The political world provides sharp examples of this pattern. Skilled politicians are almost universally described as warm, charming, and genuinely interested in whoever they are talking to. Lyndon B. Johnson, one of the most effective and manipulative political operators in American history, was described by those who knew him as someone who could make you feel like the most important person in the world when he needed something from you. The warmth was real in the moment, but it was also entirely purposeful. In your own life, friend, I want you to develop what I call niceness discernment. Notice whether someone's kindness is consistent across contexts. Do they treat the waiter the same way they treat the CEO? Notice whether their compliments always seem to precede requests. Notice whether they are still warm with you when you have nothing useful to offer them. The test of genuine warmth is not what people do when kindness costs them nothing. It is what they do when it costs them something. Real virtue has friction. It disagrees when disagreement is needed. It expresses discomfort when discomfort is warranted. It is sometimes inconvenient. Strategic niceness, by contrast, is frictionless, because its purpose is to move you, not to connect with you. Once you learn to see the difference, you will never unsee it, and you will save yourself enormous amounts of misplaced trust, wasted loyalty, and preventable betrayal. Brutal truth, too. Most people are controlled by fear, not logic. I have great news and uncomfortable news for you, and I will give you both. The great news: you are capable of extraordinary rational thought. The human prefrontal cortex is one of the most remarkable structures in the known universe. A biological instrument capable of long-term planning, abstract reasoning, moral deliberation, and creative problem-solving. The uncomfortable news: this extraordinary capability is routinely overridden by fear. And almost every person, institution, and system of influence in your life knows this and uses it. Let us talk about the neuroscience briefly, because it matters. Your brain has what neuroscientists call an amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure deep in the limbic system that processes threats and triggers fear responses. When the amygdala activates, it does so faster than your conscious mind can process what is happening. By the time you decide to feel afraid, the fear response is already underway. And when fear is active, blood flow and neural activity shift away from the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part, toward more primitive, reactive brain regions. In short, fear literally makes you less intelligent in the moment it is triggered. Now, to consider who benefits from this fact. Politicians craft messaging not around the genuine complexity of policy issues, but around threats to your safety, your job, your community, your children. Advertisers do not sell products, they sell relief from anxiety. Don't be the person who showed up unprepared. What if something happens to your family? Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, news networks. The business model is, in many cases, fundamentally fear-based. A 2019 analysis published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that negative, fear-inducing content spreads approximately 6 times faster on social media than positive content. Platforms optimized for engagement are, therefore, structurally optimized for fear amplification. This is not a conspiracy. It is an algorithmic consequence of human psychology, In personal relationships, manipulators use fear with surgical precision. The fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, the fear of being seen as difficult, the fear of missing out. These are levers that skilled manipulators identify and pull. Research on coercive control in intimate relationships, pioneered by psychologist Evan Stark, shows that the most effective control mechanisms are not physical force, but the careful cultivation of fear. Fear of the partner's anger, fear of social isolation, fear of financial dependency. So what do you do with this, friend? The first step is the simplest and hardest. Notice when you are afraid. Not panicked, afraid. Notice the subtle background hum of anxiety that shapes your decisions. Ask yourself, is this fear based on a real and present danger, or has it been installed in me by someone who benefits from my compliance? The second step is to deliberately slow down when fear is active. Fear wants you to decide now, act now, commit now, pause, breathe. The amygdala loses influence when you give the prefrontal cortex time to come back online. The third step is to study your specific fear triggers, because they are specific, and the people who want to control you have probably already mapped them. Brutal Truth 3. Information is the ultimate currency. We live in what economists call the information economy. But this phrase undersells something far older and more fundamental. Information has always been the deepest form of power. The person who knows more in almost every context holds advantage over the person who knows less. And the person who controls what others know holds the most power of all. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War over 2,000 years ago that all warfare is based on deception, on controlling what your opponent knows and does not know. Francis Bacon, the 16th century philosopher and statesman, gave us the phrase, "Knowledge is power," in 1597, but it was not meant as an inspirational poster. It was an observation about political reality. The modern world has amplified this ancient truth enormously. In corporate environments, access to information is one of the most reliable predictors of organizational influence. Research by organizational psychologist David Krackhart shows that information brokers, people who sit between different social clusters and control the flow of information between them, hold disproportionate influence regardless of their formal title or seniority. They are not the most talented people in the room. They are the most connected, in the information sense. And they leverage that connection deliberately. Think about this in your own workplace or social environment. Who knows things before everyone else? Who is always in the room when decisions are made? Who seems to know about personnel changes, strategic shifts, or relationship developments before they are announced? That person is almost certainly exercising information power, intentionally or not. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They share information selectively, giving you enough to feel trusted, but withholding enough to maintain advantage. They use confidential disclosures as bonding tools. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but that sentence is a social hook. It creates intimacy, reciprocity, and a sense of special access, all of which bind you to the person sharing. Meanwhile, they are watching what you reveal. Strategic information gathering through conversation is an old technique. Ask questions, express sympathy, create emotional safety, and let the other person fill the silence with disclosures they did not consciously intend to make. Here is what I want you to take from this chapter, friend. First, become aware of what you reveal and to whom, not out of paranoia, but out of strategic consciousness. Second, pay attention to information asymmetries in your relationships. If someone always knows more than you about things that affect you, Ask why. Third, cultivate your own information network deliberately, not through gossip, but through genuine relationship building across different social spheres. And finally, when someone shares confidential information with you, notice the feeling it creates. That feeling of special access and intimacy is real, and it is being used. Brutal Truth 4. Loyalty is conditional, always. This one is going to sting a little. I know, I am sorry. But we are friends, and this is the kind of thing a real friend tells you. There is no such thing as unconditional loyalty between people who have something to lose or gain from each other. Loyalty is always, at some level, a calculation, conscious or unconscious, about what the relationship provides and whether those provisions are worth the costs of maintaining it. When the calculation changes, the loyalty changes. Almost always. I am not saying that people are heartless. I am saying that even the most loyal people have a threshold, and that threshold is determined by the costs and benefits of the relationship, including social costs, emotional costs, reputational costs, and material costs. History illustrates this with brutal clarity. The most powerful dictators in history, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, were surrounded by people who professed absolute loyalty, and ultimately either betrayed them, abandoned them, or were abandoned by them. The research on organizational behavior consistently shows that employee loyalty to a company lasts precisely as long as the company's behavior justifies it. A 2020 Gallup survey found that only 20% of employees feel strongly connected to their organization's culture and values, meaning 80% are, at some level, in a provisional relationship with their employer. In personal relationships, the research of John Gottman, perhaps the world's leading expert on relationship psychology, shows that relationship loyalty is not a fixed trait, but an ongoing process of emotional investment and repair. Couples who stay together do not do so because of some eternal loyalty instinct. They do so because they continuously reinvest in the relationship. When that reinvestment stops, loyalty dissolves. Sometimes slowly, sometimes overnight. The person who feels most betrayed by shifting loyalty is always the person who believed the loyalty was unconditional. Because when you believe loyalty is absolute, you stop maintaining the relationship that generates it. You stop investing, appreciating, reciprocating. And eventually the other person's calculation shifts. What does this mean for you practically? It means several things. First, never take anyone's loyalty for granted. Not your partner's, not your team's, not your friends'. Continue to invest in relationships even when they feel secure. Second, understand that when someone's loyalty to you shifts, it is usually not a sudden betrayal, but the visible result of a long accumulating shift in their internal calculation. Third, be honest with yourself about your own loyalties. What are they actually based on? What would change them? And fourth, perhaps most importantly, stop expecting from others what you would not honestly commit to yourself. Brutal Truth 5. Weakness invites exploitation. Before we talk about this one, I want to be absolutely clear about something. Displaying vulnerability in the right context, with the right people, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. Brené Brown's research, documented in her landmark 2010 book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and subsequent work, shows convincingly that genuine vulnerability is the foundation of deep human connection, creativity, and meaningful leadership. So this truth is not about eliminating vulnerability. It is about understanding that weakness, not vulnerability, But genuine structural weakness in your position is something predatory people actively look for and exploit. Ethologists, scientists who study animal behavior, have documented a phenomenon called predator targeting. In groups of animals, predators do not attack randomly. They specifically identify and pursue individuals who show signs of weakness, isolation from the group, injury, disorientation, or reduced alertness. The targeting is almost always accurate. The isolated, the injured, the distracted are disproportionately attacked. Human social behavior shows strikingly similar patterns. Robert Hare, a criminal psychologist at the University of British Columbia, who spent decades studying psychopathy, documented that individuals with psychopathic tendencies show heightened ability to detect vulnerability in others. In one study, people with elevated psychopathy scores were able to identify individuals with trauma histories simply by watching them walk. They picked up on subtle gait patterns associated with past victimization. This is not science fiction. It is documented, peer-reviewed research. In organizational settings, the vulnerabilities that attract exploitation tend to be financial desperation, social isolation, desperate need for approval, fear of conflict, or recent personal loss. People in these states make easier targets for everything, from unfair contracts to exploitative relationships to workplace abuse. The lesson is not to pretend you are invincible. The lesson is strategic awareness. Know what your vulnerabilities are. Understand which of them are visible to others. Be thoughtful about who you expose them to. Genuine vulnerability shared in a safe, chosen context is powerful and connective. Structural weakness displayed indiscriminately is an invitation that some people will accept in ways you will not enjoy. Part 2. The Manipulation Playbook. The tactics used against you every single day. Brutal Truth 6. Guilt is the most effective leash. If you want to understand how human beings are controlled without force, study guilt. Of all the psychological mechanisms used to maintain power over others, guilt is the most elegant and the most durable because, unlike fear, which requires a continuous threat to sustain, guilt is self-sustaining. Once installed, the controlled person maintains and amplifies their own cage. Guilt is a natural, evolutionarily useful emotion. Research by developmental psychologist Martin Hoffman shows that the capacity for guilt emerges in early childhood and is closely linked to the development of empathy. The ability to understand that one's actions affect others. A conscience that generates guilt is a functional, pro-social mechanism. Without it, we would have considerably more sociopaths than we already do. But like any functional system, guilt can be hacked, and in manipulative relationships, it is hacked constantly. The mechanics of manufactured guilt are well documented in the clinical psychology literature on coercive control and narcissistic abuse. The manipulator identifies something the target values: their image as a good parent, a loyal partner, a generous friend, a hard worker, and then frames the target's failure to comply with the manipulator's demands as a violation of that value. A good mother would not put her own needs first. I do so much for you and you can't do this one thing. After everything I've been through, you're really going to say no. Notice the structure of these statements. They are not direct requests. They are reframings. They define the situation in a way where compliance becomes the moral default and refusal becomes moral failure. The target does not just feel pressured, they feel guilty. Research by psychologist Harriet Lerner in her influential book, The Dance of Anger, demonstrates that guilt induction is one of the most common conflict management strategies in family systems. and that it is frequently passed down across generations. People who were manipulated through guilt as children often either become guilt manipulators themselves or become hypersensitive to guilt induction throughout their adult lives, making them perpetually easy to control. Here is the liberating truth about guilt. Guilt over real harm is appropriate and functional. Guilt that has been manufactured to serve someone else's agenda is not moral information. It is a control signal. Learning to tell the difference is one of the most important psychological skills you can develop. Ask yourself, did I actually harm someone, or am I just failing to meet their expectations? Those are entirely different things. The first deserves reflection. The second deserves examination of whose expectations they are and why you have accepted them. Brutal Truth 7. Flattery is a weapon dressed as a gift. I am going to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable about yourself. You are not nearly as immune to flattery as you think you are. Neither am I. Neither is anyone. Research published in the Journal of Marketing Research by scientists Elaine Chan and Jaideep Sengupta found that even when people are told explicitly that a compliment is insincere, that it is being used to influence them, they still respond positively to it. The conscious knowledge of manipulation does not fully counteract the emotional response. We are wired to respond to praise. It activates the brain's reward systems in ways that temporarily reduce our critical faculties. This is not a character flaw, it is biology. But it is biology that can be exploited. The use of flattery as a tactical precursor to requests is ancient and cross-cultural. Dale Carnegie understood it. His 1936 classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People, dedicates substantial space to the power of genuine appreciation and the importance of making people feel valued. But Carnegie's observations, filtered through less scrupulous practitioners, became a blueprint for manipulative complimenting. Watch the sequence. The skilled flatterer does not compliment randomly. The compliment serves a purpose and precedes a request. You are so much better at this than I am. Would you mind just taking a look at my presentation? You've always had such good judgment. I wanted to ask you about something. Honestly, you're the only person I trust. Can I ask a favor? The compliment creates what Robert Cialdini calls reciprocity pressure, the deeply human discomfort with receiving without giving back. When someone makes you feel good, you want to return the favor. When that good feeling was strategically engineered to precede a specific request, you are more likely to agree to that request than you would have been otherwise, and you will feel good about it. In professional settings, flattery is used to bypass critical evaluation. Employees who are regularly praised for their judgment are significantly more likely to implement their manager's ideas without questioning them. Investors who are called sophisticated and discerning are more likely to make the investment being pitched. Con artists routinely establish their marks as smart before pitching the scam, because smart people, having been told they are smart, are less likely to ask the questions a knave person might. I am not telling you to become suspicious of every compliment. Most praise is genuine and freely given. What I am telling you is to develop an awareness of the sequence. Compliment, then request. When you notice that sequence, slow down. Evaluate the request on its merits, separated from the warmth the compliment created. Brutal Truth 8. Victimhood can be weaponized. This truth requires careful handling because it is frequently misused by people who want to dismiss or disbelieve genuine victims. So let me be precise. Genuine victimhood is real, common, and deserves acknowledgement and support. This chapter is not about genuine victims. It is about something specific and distinct, the strategic performance of victimhood as a manipulation tactic. The phenomenon has a clinical term in the psychological literature: covert aggression. Psychiatrist George K. Simon, in his influential book In Sheep's Clothing, describes covert aggression as aggression disguised as submission, where the aggressor maintains power not through direct force or confrontation, but through positioning themselves as helpless, suffering, and wronged. The strategy is extraordinarily effective because it disarms the target's defenses. It is very hard to confront someone who is crying. It is very difficult to hold a boundary against someone who positions any boundary setting as additional cruelty inflicted upon them. The mechanics are consistent across contexts. The covert aggressor does something harmful, lies, manipulates, takes advantage, breaks an agreement. When confronted, rather than acknowledging the harm, they pivot to their own suffering. I can't believe you're attacking me when I'm going through so much. After everything I've sacrificed for you, you're going to treat me like this? The confrontation is reframed as evidence of your cruelty, and they emerge as the victim of the conversation they started. In organizational settings, this pattern is well documented. Research on workplace bullying, particularly the work of Gary Namey at the Workplace Bullying Institute, shows that skilled workplace bullies are often perceived by management as the victims in conflicts they initiate. They cultivate impressions of fragility and unfair treatment, which makes it difficult for genuine targets of their behavior to be believed. The distinguishing feature between genuine victimhood and weaponized victimhood is accountability. Genuine victims, even in the midst of real suffering, can usually acknowledge their own role in dynamics and focus on resolution. Weaponized victimhood consistently deflects accountability, escalates suffering narratives when confronted, and uses suffering specifically to avoid consequences. If you find yourself consistently feeling guilty for holding someone accountable, consistently feeling like the bad guy in conflicts they initiated, or consistently walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their suffering narrative, you are probably dealing with weaponized victimhood. The appropriate response is not callousness. It is clarity. Brutal Truth 9. Love and affection are frequently used as control mechanisms. This one is the most personal, so I want to speak to you gently but without flinching. Love is the most beautiful human experience. It is also, in the hands of people who do not love cleanly, one of the most powerful forms of leverage that exists, because the person who loves someone, or who desperately wants to be loved, will often do things they would never otherwise do, accept things they would never otherwise accept, and stay in situations they know are harmful to them. Healthy love does not require you to earn it continuously. Research by John Bowlby on attachment theory, later developed by Mary Ainsworth and many others, establishes clearly that secure attachment, the foundation of healthy love, is characterized by consistent availability, reliable comfort, and safety without condition. In secure relationships, love is not withheld as punishment. It is not deployed as reward for compliance. It is present as a stable background condition. Insecure and manipulative relationships invert this. Love and affection become variable, unpredictably warm and cold, generous and withholding. This variability is not accidental. It is the mechanism of control. Psychologist Judith Herman, in her foundational work, Trauma and Recovery, documents how captors and abusers across very different contexts, from prisoners of war to domestic abuse situations, use the same basic control structure. Alternate punishment and reward, unpredictably, create emotional dependency through intermittent reinforcement, and use affection as something that must be earned through compliance. This structure works because variable reinforcement, being rewarded sometimes, unpredictably, creates stronger attachment behavior than consistent reward. Gamblers understand this instinctively. Slot machines are more compelling than guaranteed payouts. In romantic relationships, the pattern commonly called love bombing, an overwhelming, intense, seemingly perfect early phase of affection, followed by withdrawal, criticism, or cold distance, is documented in the clinical literature as a manipulation cycle. The initial intensity creates emotional dependency, and the subsequent withdrawal activates fear of abandonment, which makes the target increasingly compliant in an effort to restore the warmth. How do you tell the difference between genuine love that has normal ups and downs and love being weaponized? Ask yourself, is the warmth conditional on my compliance? Do I feel safer when I agree and anxious when I assert myself? Does the person consistently use withdrawal of affection as a response to my independent choices? If the answers are yes, the love is a mechanism, not a gift. Brutal Truth 10. The silent treatment is a power move. Silence can be sacred. It can be healing. It can be respectful of another's need for space. And it can also be a precisely calibrated weapon used to inflict emotional pain and assert dominance without a single word being spoken. Kipling Williams, a social psychologist at Purdue University, has spent decades studying what he calls ostracism, the experience of being deliberately ignored or excluded. His research, summarized in his book, Ostracism, The Kiss of Social Death, demonstrates that being ignored activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Functional MRI studies show that social rejection and physical pain overlap significantly in the brain's processing. Being given the silent treatment is not just emotionally uncomfortable, it is neurologically painful. This is why it works so devastatingly well as a control mechanism. The person giving the silent treatment causes real pain without any action. No words, no confrontation, no visible aggression. If confronted about it, they can claim they simply needed space, or that they had nothing to say, or that the other person is being oversensitive. The mechanism is deniable while the pain is real. In the context of romantic relationships and family dynamics, the silent treatment functions as both punishment and power demonstration. The message it delivers is, my approval of you is so important to your well-being that its withdrawal constitutes a meaningful sanction. The longer it is maintained, the more desperate the target becomes to restore communication, often by apologizing for things they did not do or agreeing to things they should not agree to. Research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that couples who use the silent treatment as a conflict strategy show significantly worse relationship outcomes over time, including lower relationship satisfaction, lower intimacy, and higher rates of relationship dissolution. And yet, in the short term, it works. It produces compliance and concession. The antidote is not to match silence with silence, though sometimes that is appropriate. The antidote is to refuse to allow another person's silence to define your emotional state. This requires developing what psychologists call self-soothing capacities, the ability to manage your own emotional equilibrium without requiring external validation. When you can sit with another person's silence without unraveling, you remove the power from the tactic. It only works if it hurts you enough to change your behavior. Brutal Truth 11. People create dependency to ensure their survival. In every system, families, workplaces, friendships, institutions, there are people who make themselves indispensable. Some do this through genuine excellence. They develop rare skills, build deep relationships, create real value. These people deserve their indispensability, and the dependency they create is healthy and mutual. Then there is the other kind. Organizational psychologists have a term for a specific dysfunctional behavior pattern: strategic incompetence with dependency maintenance. It describes people who create or preserve dependency not by making themselves excellent, but by making others dependent on them specifically, sometimes by sabotaging others' ability to function independently, sometimes by monopolizing information or relationships, sometimes by structuring tasks so that no one else understands how to do them. Harriet Lerner's research on family systems describes what she calls the overfunctioner-underfunctioner dynamic. In this pattern, one person in a relationship takes on an increasing share of responsibility and problem-solving, apparently out of helpfulness, while the other person's capacity for independent functioning atrophies. The overfunctioner feels useful and needed. The underfunctioner becomes genuinely unable to function without the overfunctioner. The dependency is real, but it was manufactured. This pattern appears in friendships too. The helpful friend who is always available for your crisis, but somehow never supports your independence or growth. The advisor who gives guidance that keeps you coming back rather than building your own judgment. The mentor who introduces you to everyone personally rather than helping you build your own network. In workplaces, the employee who never documents their processes, who insists on being the sole point of contact for key clients, who builds systems only they understand. This person is creating structural dependency deliberately. They are not necessarily conscious of the manipulation. But the outcome is the same. When they are present, things work. When they are absent, things fail. This appears to be value. It is actually leverage. How do you recognize and protect yourself from this pattern? Watch whether the help you receive builds your capacity or simply meets your immediate need. Watch whether the people who help you most also help you become less dependent on them over time, or more. The people who genuinely care about you want you to need them less. The people who are managing you want you to need them more. Brutal Truth 12. Gaslighting is more common than you think. The term gaslighting comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband systematically manipulates his wife into doubting her perception of reality, most memorably by dimming the gas-powered lights in their home and then insisting she is imagining the change. The film gave a name to something that had always existed, but had never been precisely labeled: the deliberate undermining of another person's grip on reality for the purpose of control. The term has entered popular usage in recent years, which means it has also been overused and sometimes applied too broadly. True gaslighting is a specific thing, a pattern of behavior specifically designed to make the target doubt their own perception, memory, and judgment. It is not the same as simply disagreeing about what happened. It is a systematic, ongoing distortion of reality. Clinical psychologist Robin Stern, in her book The Gaslight Effect, identifies several core gaslighting tactics: outright denial of events that occurred, that never happened, trivializing the target's emotional response, "You're being crazy," diverting when confronted with evidence. "You always do this." Bring up the past instead of dealing with what's happening now, and reframing the target's accurate perception as pathological. "You need help," if you really think that's what I said. The cumulative effect of sustained gaslighting is a genuine erosion of the target's confidence in their own perception. Research on traumatic bonding and coercive control documents that long-term gaslighting survivors frequently describe feeling crazy, losing confidence in their memory and judgment, and becoming dependent on the gaslighter's interpretation of reality, because their own has been so thoroughly undermined. Gaslighting is not limited to romantic relationships. It occurs in workplaces, in families of origin, in political discourse, and in organizational cultures. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology found evidence of gaslighting dynamics in workplace settings, particularly between managers and employees, with significant effects on employee mental health and job performance. The defense is documentation and external reality checking. Write things down. Keep records. Talk to trusted people outside the relationship. And trust this: if you consistently feel confused, doubt your own sanity, or feel increasingly certain that you are the problem in a relationship that used to seem normal, that pattern of confusion is itself information worth taking seriously. Part 3. The Laws of Social Power. How hierarchies form and who truly rises to the top. Brutal Truth 13. Perception is reality in the social world. There is a version of this truth that is shallow and cynical. Just manage your image, and nothing else matters. That is not what I am telling you. What I am telling you is something more nuanced and more important. In the domain of human social interaction, perception is the medium through which everything, your relationships, your opportunities, your influence, is transmitted. Ignoring this is not virtue, it is negligence. Research in social psychology consistently demonstrates that first impressions form within the first 7 seconds of meeting someone and are extraordinarily difficult to revise once formed. Amy Cuddy's research at Harvard Business School shows that these rapid judgments cluster around 2 primary dimensions: warmth, trustworthiness, and competence. People decide almost instantly whether they trust you and whether they respect your abilities. And this rapid assessment then shapes how they process all subsequent information about you. This is called the halo effect, a cognitive bias documented extensively since Edward Thorndike first described it in 1920. People who are judged positively on one dimension, physical attractiveness, warmth, confidence, tend to be rated positively on other, unrelated dimensions. And people who are judged negatively on one dimension suffer the inverse, the horn effect, where a single negative impression contaminates subsequent assessments. What this means practically is that your reputation, the perception others hold of you, is an asset or a liability that operates independently of your actual qualities. A person of moderate competence who manages their reputation well will often outperform a highly competent person who manages it poorly. This is not fair, but it is documented and consistent. Warren Buffett famously said, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it." The asymmetry is real. Reputations are built slowly, through consistent behavior over time, and they can be dismantled rapidly by a single dramatic incident or a few well-placed words from the right person. This is why controlling your narrative matters. It is not about dishonesty or performance. It is about being intentional about what you show, when you show it, and to whom. Your best qualities deserve an audience. Your vulnerabilities deserve protection. And your mistakes deserve management. Not concealment, but context and correction before others frame them for you. Brutal Truth 14. Timing is more powerful than talent. Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, published in 2008, contains an observation that disturbed a lot of people who had been told that success comes purely from effort and talent. He analyzed the birth dates of elite Canadian hockey players and found a remarkable pattern. The vast majority were born in the first 3 months of the year. The reason, he argued, was the age cutoff for youth hockey leagues, which meant children born in January were the oldest and most physically developed in their cohort, received more coaching attention, and were selected for advanced programs at higher rates. Over time, this early advantage compounded into actual elite performance. The phenomenon he described, accumulated advantage, applies far beyond hockey. The timing of your birth relative to business cycles, your entry into an industry relative to its growth curve, your presentation of an idea relative to when the audience is ready to hear it. These timing factors often matter more than the quality of your effort or the extent of your talent. Jeff Bezos founded Amazon in 1994, just as the commercial internet was beginning its exponential growth phase. He was not uniquely more talented than hundreds of other entrepreneurs. He was building the right thing at the right moment, and he understood it. Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, just before the MP3 player revolution and mobile computing converged to create the conditions for the iPod and iPhone. The talent was there, but so was the timing. In your own life and career, this truth has actionable implications. First, develop genuine sensitivity to timing in human interactions. The right idea presented to the wrong person at the wrong moment will fail. The same idea to the same person presented when they are in the right emotional and situational state may succeed effortlessly. This is not manipulation, it is emotional intelligence applied to timing. Second, learn to read environmental shifts before they become obvious. The people who benefit most from timing are those who see the wave before it crests. This requires paying attention to weak signals, the small changes in language, investment patterns, social discourse, and technology adoption that precede major shifts. And third, if you have been consistently excellent at something and it has not produced the results you expected, consider timing. Sometimes the answer is not to try harder, but to try at a different moment or in a different environment. Brutal Truth 15. Whoever needs less holds more power. This truth will feel counterintuitive until it clicks, and then it will feel so obvious that you will wonder how you did not see it before. In every relationship, romantic, professional, social, there is what sociologists call a principle of least interest. The person who is less invested in the continuation of the relationship holds more power within it. The person who needs the relationship more will make more concessions, accept more unfavorable terms, and tolerate more mistreatment to preserve it. The person who needs it less sets the terms. Waller and Hill first described this principle formally in their 1951 book, The Family, but the observation predates academic formalization by millennia. Every negotiator knows it. Every salesperson knows it. Every experienced romantic partner knows it. Need, visible, demonstrable need, is leverage surrendered. This is why skilled negotiators never negotiate from desperation, and why companies that want a deal rarely reveal how badly they want it. This is why the candidate who already has a job negotiates better compensation than the candidate who is unemployed. The underlying dynamic is the same in all cases. Visible need reduces power. Research on salary negotiation by economist Andreas Labrandt and behaviorist John List found that people who showed lower emotional investment in reaching an agreement consistently achieved better outcomes than those who demonstrated higher need for closure. The willingness to walk away, genuine willingness, not performed, is one of the most powerful tools in any negotiation. In romantic relationships, the same principle operates. Early relationship research by sociologist Willard Waller showed that in romantic partnerships, the person who is less emotionally invested tends to dominate the relationship dynamic. Not because they are superior, but because their lower need gives them more behavioral flexibility. I want to be careful here, friend, because this can be misread as an endorsement of emotional unavailability or coldness. That is not what it is. What I am describing is the importance of genuine self-sufficiency, having a life, an identity, and sources of meaning that do not depend on any single relationship or opportunity. This is not emotional withholding. It is the psychological security that comes from knowing you will be fine regardless. Cultivate it genuinely, not performatively. Because performed needlessness is just another form of need. Brutal Truth 16. Most alliances are temporary convenience. History is littered with alliances that seemed unshakable and dissolved the moment circumstances changed. The Allied powers of World War II, the United States and Soviet Union, were united against a common enemy and became Cold War adversaries within years of the victory they shared. Corporate mergers, celebrated as natural fits, end in acrimonious dissolutions. Political coalitions built on shared opposition collapse once the shared enemy is defeated. The pattern is not a failure of character. It is the natural life cycle of interest-based alliances. People and organizations unite when they share common interests or common enemies. When the shared interest resolves or the common enemy disappears, the alliance has served its purpose, and the underlying differences in interest reassert themselves. Research on coalition behavior in competitive environments, from organizational psychology to game theory, consistently shows that the most durable alliances are those built on aligned long-term interests, not shared short-term goals. When an alliance is built purely on a common threat, it will dissolve when the threat does. This has important implications for how you build and maintain your own network and alliances. First, never mistake an alliance of convenience for genuine loyalty. The colleague who supports you, because your interests currently align, will not necessarily support you when they diverge. Appreciate the current alignment without over-investing emotionally in its permanence. Second, understand that the most durable professional and social relationships are built on something deeper than current interest alignment. On genuine mutual respect, on authentic connection, on shared values. These relationships survive interest shifts because they are not exclusively interest-based. Third, when you see an alliance forming around you, between others, or involving you, ask what the underlying interests are. Who benefits from this alignment? What happens when circumstances change? Being clear-eyed about the transactional elements of alliances does not make you cynical. It makes you honest about what you are building and how much weight it can bear. Brutal Truth 17. Charisma is a learnable deception. When we encounter someone genuinely charismatic, someone whose presence seems to light up a room, who makes you feel energized and seen, who seems to radiate a kind of magnetic force, it feels supernatural. Like some people are simply born with a quality the rest of us lack. This feeling is wrong. Charisma is not a fixed trait that people possess or do not. It is a set of observable, learnable behaviors that create specific emotional responses in other people. Researchers at the University of Lausanne, led by John Antonakis, have documented what they call charismatic leadership tactics. specific verbal and nonverbal behaviors that reliably produce the perception of charisma across different cultures and contexts. These tactics include the use of metaphor and narrative, expressions of moral conviction, the setting of ambitious goals, communication of confidence about achieving those goals, the use of rhetorical contrast, not this, but that, and body language that communicates openness and animation. When people learn these tactics and deploy them deliberately, they are rated as significantly more charismatic by observers, even when those observers are experienced evaluators. The charisma is created, not innate. This is not to say that charismatic people are necessarily manipulative or fake. Many people who are perceived as charismatic are simply very good at the natural expression of genuine conviction and connection. They have, through temperament and experience, developed these behaviors organically. But many others have learned them deliberately as a professional skill, and some deploy them specifically to create an impression that is not matched by their actual substance. The warning here is specific. Charisma is evidence of someone's social skill, not of their character, competence, or trustworthiness. Charismatic people are elected, hired, followed, loved, and invested in at rates that far exceed what their actual track records justify, because charisma activates our limbic systems and temporarily suspends critical evaluation. When you feel strongly drawn to someone based primarily on their presence, energy, and charm, pause. Evaluate what you actually know about them. What have they actually done? What do people who have worked with them closely say? Presence is real, but presence is not the same as substance. Brutal Truth 18. Crowds are easier to manipulate than individuals. Gustave Le Bon, the French social psychologist, published The Crowd, a study of the popular mind in 1895, and it remains one of the most disturbing and insightful observations ever made about human social behavior. Le Bon argued that when individuals merge into a crowd, their individual intelligence and moral judgment diminish, while their susceptibility to emotional contagion and external influence increases dramatically. The crowd becomes, in his analysis, a single organism with a collective psychology qualitatively different and more primitive than the psychology of its individual members. Contemporary research has largely validated Le Bon's core insight while adding important nuance. Social psychologist Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments of the 1950s demonstrated that people will publicly agree with obviously incorrect answers from group members, not because they actually believe the incorrect answer, but because the social pressure of group conformity override individual judgment. Even when people privately knew the answer was wrong, 37% conformed to the group's incorrect position. The neuroscience of crowd behavior shows that social conformity activates the brain's reward systems. Agreeing with the group feels good, literally, and dissenting from the group activates threat responses. Disagreeing feels threatening. This creates a powerful bias toward conformity at the neurological level. Politicians, demagogues, advertisers, and cult leaders have understood this for as long as there have been crowds. The techniques for mass manipulation are well documented and disturbingly simple. Create a sense of urgency, identify an enemy or threat, generate emotional intensity, use simple and repetitive messaging, discourage individual critical reflection by framing it as disloyalty or cowardice, and cultivate a sense of special belonging within the group. The researcher Robert Lifton, studying Chinese communist brainwashing techniques in his 1961 book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, identified 8 criteria of what he called ideological totalism, the thought control environment. These criteria appear not only in political cults but in business cults, religious extremism, and certain organizational cultures. Your defense. Maintain your individual reflection practice. Be suspicious of any environment that discourages questioning. Notice when you are in a crowd state, when the emotion is collective and intense, and moving faster than your individual processing can keep up with. That is exactly when manipulation is most effective and critical thinking is most needed. Part 4. Dark Truths About Ambition and Success. What they don't teach in business school or self-help books. Brutal Truth 19. Success often requires ruthlessness you'll have to make peace with. I want to be honest with you about something that self-help culture almost never says directly. Achieving significant success in competitive environments often requires making choices that will cause real harm to real people. And the people who reach the highest levels of power and influence have almost all made those choices. This is not a reason to abandon ethics. It is a reason to be honest about what ambition actually costs, so that you can make conscious decisions rather than pretending the costs do not exist. Research on executive decision-making consistently finds that senior leaders make decisions under conditions of incomplete information, time pressure, and competing obligations, and that the decisions with the best long-term outcomes often involve short-term harm to some stakeholders. Layoffs that save companies and the jobs of thousands often harm hundreds. Strategic pivots that protect long-term viability require abandoning commitments made in good faith to partners, customers, or communities. The calculus is real, and it is not always clean. Business historians examining the careers of transformative leaders, from Carnegie and Rockefeller in the industrial age to Jobs and Bezos in the digital age, document consistent patterns of ruthlessness that coexist with genuine vision and achievement. Andrew Carnegie built libraries and funded peace initiatives while operating steel mills with labor conditions that killed and maimed workers. This is not hagiography or condemnation. It is the complexity of real human achievement. Psychologist Robert Hogan's research on leadership derailment shows that many of the qualities that help people rise to power, self-confidence bordering on arrogance, willingness to make unilateral decisions, single-minded focus on goals, low sensitivity to others' emotional responses, are the same qualities that eventually derail them or cause significant collateral damage. What does this mean for you? It means being honest with yourself about what you are willing to do and unwilling to do on the path to whatever you are pursuing. Most people's ethical lines are not where they think they are. They discover them only when they encounter specific situations. Doing that discovery work in advance, deliberately, is one of the most valuable things a serious person can do. Know your actual lines, not your aspirational ones, and count the costs honestly. Brutal Truth 20. Meritocracy is largely a myth. The meritocracy narrative, that ability plus effort equals outcome, is one of the most powerful and most empirically questionable ideologies of modern life. It is powerful because it provides a satisfying explanation for differential outcomes. Successful people deserve to succeed. Struggling people deserve to struggle. It is questionable because the actual research on social mobility and career advancement tells a very different story. Michael Young, a British sociologist, coined the term meritocracy in 1958. In a satirical dystopian novel intended as a warning, not an endorsement. The concept was then adopted sincerely by the establishment Young was satirizing. He spent much of the rest of his life appalled by what he had created. The data on social mobility in the United States, often cited as the ultimate meritocracy, is sobering. Research by economist Raj Chetty and his colleagues at Harvard's Opportunity Insights project has documented that the probability of reaching the top 20% of income earners from the bottom 20% is approximately 8%. Intergenerational economic mobility in the United States is lower than in Canada, Germany, Denmark, or Australia. Countries with more explicitly redistributive policies within organizations, advancement research consistently finds that network connections, visibility to senior decision-makers, and social similarity to existing leadership predict advancement at least as strongly as performance metrics. A 2019 study published in the American Journal of Sociology found that graduating from an elite university predicted career advancement in consulting and finance independently of actual job performance, because network access, not performance, was the primary driver. This is not an argument for nihilism or passivity. Skill, effort, and excellence still matter. They matter a great deal. But they operate within a system of structural advantages and disadvantages that powerfully shape their returns. What does this mean for you? First, stop blaming yourself or others entirely for outcomes that have significant structural determinants. Second, understand that navigating the real system, building visibility, cultivating networks, understanding organizational politics is not selling out. It is adapting to reality. Third, advocate for systems that more accurately reward actual merit, while accepting that you have to succeed within the imperfect systems that exist today. Brutal Truth 21. People forgive success and condemn failure. Here is a social law that operates with almost mathematical consistency. The same action produces entirely different moral assessments, depending on whether it succeeds or fails. Winners are praised for their boldness, losers are condemned for their recklessness. The identical decision, evaluated after the fact, is either genius or stupidity based entirely on outcome. Psychologists call this outcome bias. The tendency to evaluate the quality of a decision based on its outcome rather than on the information and reasoning available at the time the decision was made. Research by Jonathan Barron and John Hershey at the University of Pennsylvania demonstrated this clearly. Study participants rated doctors whose patients recovered as having made better decisions than doctors whose patients did not, even when they were shown that the medical decisions made were identical. The cultural expression of this bias is pervasive. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple in 1985, widely described as an arrogant, difficult person whose management style was poisonous. He returned in 1997, and the same qualities were reframed as visionary intensity and uncompromising standards. Nothing about Jobs changed. The outcomes changed. Elon Musk's early career at Tesla and SpaceX was filled with near-failure moments. Tesla nearly went bankrupt multiple times. SpaceX had a string of launch failures. Had those companies failed, Musk would be remembered as an eccentric billionaire who burned through money on fantasies. Because they succeeded, he is a genius. This asymmetry has important implications for how you manage risk and how you position your efforts. First, understand that your calibration of a decision's quality must be independent of its outcome. You can make good decisions that fail and bad decisions that succeed. Your decision-making process deserves honest evaluation, regardless of results. Second, when you take intelligent risks that do not work out, Be prepared to manage the narrative actively. People's default instinct will be to use hindsight to condemn your judgment. Providing context, the information available, the alternatives considered, the reasonable logic of the choice helps counteract outcome bias. And third, extend this understanding to others. Judge people on the quality of their reasoning, not just their results. The world produces enough unfair outcome-based judgments. You do not have to add to them. Brutal Truth 22. Your generosity will be exploited if unguarded. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant spent years studying giving, taking, and matching behaviors in professional environments, culminating in his 2013 book, Give and Take. His research found something counterintuitive and important. The people who give most generously, without strategic calculation, show up at both extremes of the success distribution. They are both the most successful and the least successful people in most organizations. Why? Because unguarded giving, generous behavior without any discernment about who receives it, systematically attracts takers. And takers, by definition, take as much as they can without reciprocating. The unguarded giver becomes a resource that is depleted rather than an investment that returns. The generous people who end up at the top of Grant's success distribution are what he calls otherish givers. People who give genuinely and generously, but who also maintain boundaries, are selective about who receives their time and energy, and notice patterns of non-reciprocation. They give in ways that build capacity and connection, rather than in ways that create dependency and exploitation. The research on what is sometimes called prosocial behavior shows consistently that unqualified generosity activates exploitation in a significant minority of people, those with higher predatory traits, while creating genuine gratitude and reciprocity in the majority. The problem is that the exploiting minority can consume a disproportionate share of a generous person's resources, particularly when that person has difficulty recognizing or confronting exploitation. The practical implication is not to become selfish. It is to become discerning. Give generously, but pay attention to the return patterns. Not transactionally, not keeping a ledger, but as a general awareness of whether your investments of time, energy, money, and attention are flowing into relationships and systems that return value, or into systems that simply absorb it. People who never reciprocate are not bad people who need your generosity to eventually inspire them. They are people whose orientation toward resources is extractive, and your continued generosity simply confirms that extraction is available without cost. Brutal Truth 23. Enemies are sometimes more useful than friends. This truth sounds cynical until you sit with it long enough to see what it is actually pointing to, that opposition, rivalry, and even enmity can serve functions in your development and your environment that friendship, comfortable, validating, affirming friendship, often cannot. The psychological research on motivation is illuminating here. Studies on competitive behavior consistently show that the presence of a specific rival, someone you are competing against directly, produces significantly greater effort, creativity, and performance improvement than competing against a general field. Researcher Gavin Kilduff at New York University has documented what he calls the rivalry effect, the performance-enhancing impact of having a clear rival on individual and team outcomes. Having a rival you are specifically trying to beat, it turns out, is more motivating than abstract goals or general competition. History is full of examples. The competition between Jobs and Gates drove both Apple and Microsoft to levels of innovation that neither might have reached in isolation. The rivalry between NASA and the Soviet space program produced the moon landing. The competition between Federer and Nadal produced a golden era of tennis that neither would have created alone. In your own professional life, the people who push back on your ideas, challenge your assumptions, compete for the same opportunities, or simply embody the standard you are trying to exceed, these people are performing a service, whether they intend to or not. They force precision, raise your game, and reveal weaknesses that comfortable friends miss. There is also a strategic dimension. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, observes that having a known opponent or rival can actually clarify your identity and your purpose, to others and to yourself. The enemy defines the hero as much as the hero defines the enemy. Organizations that face genuine competition produce better products than monopolies. People who face genuine challenges become more capable than people in purely supportive environments. The lesson is not to cultivate unnecessary conflict. It is to stop treating every form of opposition as something to be eliminated, and to start asking what information and growth the opposition might be offering. Part 5. Psychological Warfare, Defense and Offense. Protecting your mind while understanding how others weaponize theirs. Brutal Truth 24. Your emotions are constantly being targeted. Every day, in ways you mostly do not notice, your emotional state is being deliberately engineered by systems far more sophisticated than you are. This is not paranoia. It is documented fact. The advertising industry in the United States alone spends approximately $300 billion annually on efforts to create specific emotional states in specific target audiences at specific moments in their lives. States that will predictably lead to purchase decisions, brand loyalty, or behavioral change. The entire industry is built on emotional targeting, but advertising is just the most obvious layer. Political messaging, news media, social media algorithms, product design, retail environments, pricing structures, and interpersonal sales tactics are all built on the same foundational understanding. Emotions drive decisions. Rational considerations post-rationalize decisions that emotions have already made. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's research, documented in his landmark 1994 book Descartes' Error, showed definitively that people with damage to the emotional processing centers of their brains become profoundly impaired decision-makers, not better ones. Without emotional input, they become paralyzed by infinite options, unable to identify what matters. Emotions are not the enemy of good decisions. They are essential to them, but they can be hijacked. The specific emotional targets are well mapped. Fear and anxiety are the most powerful activators of immediate action. Envy and inadequacy drive aspirational purchases and social comparison. Nostalgia creates attachment to brands and products. Moral outrage drives engagement and sharing. Belonging and identity threat drive tribal behavior and group loyalty. Each of these emotional states is reliably producible through specific techniques, and each drives predictable behavioral responses. Social media platforms do not accidentally produce anxiety, outrage, and addictive engagement. These outcomes are the product of feedback loop optimization systems that learned, through billions of interactions, exactly which types of content produce the highest engagement. And high engagement content, it turns out, is almost exclusively emotionally activating content and predominantly in the negative register. Developing emotional sovereignty, the ability to notice when your emotions are being deliberately activated and to choose your response consciously, is one of the most important capacities you can build in the current environment. It begins with one simple practice. Before acting on a strong emotion, name the emotion, identify what triggered it, and ask who benefits from your current emotional state. Brutal Truth 25. Most arguments are about power, not logic. I want you to think about the last significant argument you had. It does not matter what it was about: money, responsibility, a decision, a perceived slight. Now ask yourself honestly, at any point during that argument, did new information actually change either person's position in real time? Or were both of you primarily fighting to have your view validated and to avoid having the other person's view prevail? Research on persuasion and argumentation tells a consistent story. Arguments between people with established relationships and existing stakes in an outcome almost never change minds in the moment they occur. A 2019 meta-analysis published in Psychological Bulletin, examining decades of research on attitude change, found that direct argumentation is one of the least effective means of changing deeply held positions, particularly when those positions are tied to identity or group membership. The reason is that arguments between people with stakes in the outcome are not primarily information exchanges. They are dominance contests. Each party is simultaneously defending their position, attacking the others, monitoring their own emotional state, and the other person's, managing the relational implications of winning or losing, and deciding how much effort this particular battle is worth. Somewhere far below all of this, facts and logic are present, but they are not driving the bus. The political scientist Jonathan Haidt's research, summarized in The Righteous Mind, demonstrates that political and moral positions are formed first by intuitive and emotional responses, and that reasoning is deployed afterward to justify positions already held. He calls this process moral dumbfounding. People feel strongly about a position, but cannot articulate principled reasons for it, because the position was not formed through principled reasoning. The reasoning came later, as justification. This does not mean arguments are pointless, or that truth does not matter. It means that if you want to actually change someone's mind, direct confrontational argument is often the worst tool available. More effective approaches include building genuine rapport first, asking questions rather than asserting positions, finding and validating genuine common ground, and creating conditions where the other person arrives at the new position themselves, rather than being pushed into it. And when you are in an argument that is clearly a dominance contest rather than a truth-seeking conversation, you have a choice. Compete for dominance, disengage from the contest, or reframe the interaction. All three are valid. None of them is winning the argument in the traditional sense. Brutal Truth 26. Isolation is the first step in any control operation. Whether you are studying the tactics of authoritarian governments, cult leaders, domestic abusers, or manipulative friends, the first move is almost always the same. Separate the target from their existing support networks. Cut them off from people who know them, love them independently, and can provide outside perspective on what is happening to them. The reason is straightforward. Outside perspective is the most reliable defense against manipulation. When you have people in your life who know you, who have your interests genuinely at heart, who can say, "This doesn't seem right," or "You seem different," or "I'm worried about you," you have an early warning system against the distortion of reality that manipulation requires. Eliminators of outside perspective, isolators, understand this, so they work to remove it, sometimes overtly. Your family never really understood you the way I do. Your friends are toxic, and they don't want you to be happy. Every time you spend time with them, you come back upset. Sometimes covertly, creating situations that conflict with social plans, expressing hurt about time spent with others, gradually consuming more and more of the target's time and emotional bandwidth, until there is no space left for other relationships. Research on cult recruitment and retention by scholars including Robert Lifton, Margaret Singer, and Stephen Hassan consistently identifies isolation as the primary mechanism of thought control. Without access to outside information and outside relationships, the member's frame of reference becomes entirely determined by the group. And within that frame, the group's narrative, however distorted, becomes the only available reality. The same mechanics operate in intimate partner violence. A 2018 review published in Trauma, Violence, and Abuse found that isolation was one of the most consistent early warning signs of escalating relationship abuse, present in the majority of cases before overt violence began. Your network is not a luxury. It is protective infrastructure. Maintain it actively, even when you are in a relationship that seems to offer everything you need. Be suspicious of any person, group, or ideology that tells you your other relationships are harmful. And if you notice your network contracting, you are seeing fewer people, confiding in fewer people, feeling more dependent on a single person or group, treat that as a signal worth examining. Brutal Truth 27. The truth is rarely volunteered. It must be extracted. People do not generally lie as often as we fear, but they omit constantly. And the difference between a lie and a strategically managed omission is, in practical terms, often nothing. Research by psychologist Bella DePolo, who has conducted some of the most extensive studies on everyday deception, found that people in her studies told about 1 to 2 lies per day on average, but that these lies were largely minor social lubricants. I'm fine. It looks great. The more consequential deceptions were more subtle, presenting information selectively, emphasizing certain facts while omitting others, allowing false impressions to form without technically creating them. In legal contexts, this distinction is codified as deception by omission, and it is just as actionable as outright lying in many jurisdictions, because the practical effect on the deceived party is identical. Skilled questioners know that the real information almost always lives in what people do not say, rather than what they do. What topics do they avoid? What questions do they deflect? What do they answer with unusual precision about a part of the question that was not actually being asked? What do they say when they think they are not being evaluated? When they are relaxed? When they believe the important conversation is over? When they are speaking about other people? Former FBI behavior analyst Joe Navarro, who wrote What Everybody is Saying, has documented how non-verbal signals, microexpressions, posture shifts, gaze aversion, pacifying behaviors, reliably reveal emotional states associated with discomfort and concealment. These signals are not lie detectors, but they are discomfort detectors, and discomfort in response to specific questions is information worth pursuing. The practical skill is learning to ask questions that reveal, rather than questions that confirm. Confirmation questions. You're happy with how this is going, right? Invite agreement. Revealing questions. What would you change about how this is going if you could change anything? Create space for actual information to emerge. Develop genuine curiosity. Not interrogative suspicion, but real interest in understanding what people actually think and what is actually happening. People who are genuinely curious ask better questions than people who are trying to catch lies. And they get more useful answers. Brutal Truth 28. Confidence without competence still wins rooms. This one is frustrating. I know, I find it frustrating too. But pretending it is not true would be doing you a disservice. The research is clear and consistent. Expressed confidence influences assessments of competence independently of actual competence. People who speak with certainty, move with assurance, and present themselves as knowing are rated as more capable, more trustworthy, and more worth following than equally or more competent people who express appropriate uncertainty. Cameron Anderson and Gavin Kilduff at the University of California, Berkeley, ran a series of studies on confidence and status, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. They found that individuals who expressed the most confidence in group problem-solving tasks were granted the highest status and the most influence, regardless of whether their contributions were actually most accurate or valuable. The confident person was followed. The accurate person, if less confident, was not. This pattern connects to a broader phenomenon that psychologist David Dunning and Justin Kruger documented in their famous 1999 research. People with limited knowledge in a domain tend to substantially overestimate their competence, while experts tend to underestimate theirs. The Dunning-Kruger effect means that, on average, the people who know the least about a topic are often the most confident about it, and that confidence gets them listened to. Why does this happen? Because from the outside, we have very limited ability to assess expertise directly, so we use confidence as a proxy. If someone seems certain, our social instincts read that certainty as grounding in real knowledge. It is an imperfect but fast heuristic that worked reasonably well in environments where the costs of deception were immediately apparent. In complex, anonymous, large-scale environments, it gets exploited constantly. The lesson has two sides. The first, understand this dynamic so you can resist being unduly influenced by confident people who are not actually right. Separate the assessment of someone's confidence from the assessment of their actual track record. The second, if you are a genuinely competent person who expresses appropriate uncertainty, know that you are being systematically undervalued and consider whether calibrating your expression of confidence upward, without dishonesty, might serve you better. Part 6. Reclaiming your power. Turning awareness into armor. Brutal Truth 29. Awareness of manipulation does not make you immune. By this point in our conversation, you know considerably more about the mechanics of manipulation than most people around you. You understand guilt induction, flattery sequencing, strategic niceness, fear activation, and the many other techniques we have covered. You might be feeling a sense of protective clarity. Now that you see the game, you will not be caught by it. I want to tell you, gently but clearly, that confidence is partially misplaced. The research on this point is both humbling and important. Studies on advertising exposure and persuasion, particularly the work of Brian Wansink at Cornell before his research came under methodological scrutiny, and later work by other consumer psychologists, consistently found that knowledge of persuasion techniques does not fully inoculate people against them. Even when subjects knew they were looking at advertisings designed to make them want a product, their desire for the product increased. The knowing did not eliminate the responding. More formally, social psychologist Richard Petty and John Cacioppo's elaboration likelihood model of persuasion distinguishes between central root processing, deliberate, effortful evaluation of arguments, and peripheral root processing, automatic, heuristic-driven evaluation. Even highly educated, analytically sophisticated people process most incoming information through the peripheral route because effortful processing is expensive, and most situations do not seem to demand it. Manipulators who know their craft will deliberately create situations that prevent central route processing. Time pressure, emotional intensity, fatigue, distraction, social pressure. Under these conditions, awareness of manipulation techniques does not fully engage the deliberate evaluation system. The limbic response happens before the cortex can interpose. The additional, psychological residue that manipulation leaves is real and documented. Research on trauma and coercive control shows that people who have been in manipulative relationships often carry lasting impact. Hypervigilance, difficulty trusting their own perceptions, patterns of relating that were adaptive in the manipulative environment but maladaptive outside it. Awareness does not undo this residue. Healing does, and healing takes time, support, and often professional help. So what is awareness actually good for if it does not make you immune? It gives you faster recognition and faster recovery. It shortens the time between something is off and I understand what is happening. It reduces the duration of confusion and the depth of the damage. It helps you choose better environments and better people before the manipulation begins. And it helps you support others who are in the middle of experiences you now recognize. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. Brutal Truth 30. The most powerful people are internally ungovernable. We have arrived at the last truth, and it is the one that everything else has been building toward. All of the awareness, all of the understanding of manipulation tactics and power dynamics and social psychology, it serves one ultimate purpose: to help you become internally ungovernable. What does that mean? It means that no external force, no social pressure, no fear activation, no guilt induction, no flattery sequence, no emotional manipulation can reliably move you against your own values, your own judgment, and your own interests. Not because you are impervious to emotion, but because your internal framework is more powerful than the external forces trying to override it. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote about his experience in Man's Search for Meaning, published in 1946. His central insight is one of the most powerful observations ever recorded about human freedom. Everything can be taken from a person except one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The guards could control his body, his food, his social connections, his physical circumstances. They could not control his internal response to those circumstances. Frankl's observation is not merely philosophical. It has psychological underpinnings that have been studied and validated. Research on resilience by Sonia Luthar, George Bonanno, and others consistently shows that the people who navigate severe adversity with the least lasting damage share a consistent profile. They have a stable sense of self that does not depend on external validation. They maintain a framework of meaning that survives catastrophic circumstances. And they retain the experience of choice even in severely constrained environments. The psychologically sovereign person, the internally ungovernable person, is not cold, not unaffected, not without need. They feel deeply. They are genuinely moved by relationships and losses and beauty and injustice. But their core identity and their core decisions are not available for purchase by external pressure. They can be persuaded by good arguments and moved by genuine emotion, but they cannot be manipulated by manufactured emotion or tactical pressure. Building this internal sovereignty is the work of a lifetime, not a chapter. It involves developing genuine self-knowledge, knowing your actual values, not the values you aspire to. It involves building an identity that does not depend on any single relationship, role, achievement, or external validation. It involves developing the capacity to tolerate discomfort, to sit with fear, uncertainty, disapproval, and social pressure without immediately acting to relieve them. And it involves a continuous commitment to honesty with yourself, which is the hardest and most important practice in this book. The world is full of systems and people trying to govern your attention, your desires, your fears, and your choices. They are sophisticated and relentless, and often brilliant. The only adequate response is to become more sovereign in your own internal world than they are skilled at penetrating it. That is the ultimate power. Not power over others, power that cannot be taken from you. Conclusion: what you do with what you know. We have covered 30 truths, and I want to spend a few final moments with you before you close this book and return to the world with everything you now carry. First, I want to acknowledge something. This material is heavy. Understanding that the world operates the way it does, that niceness is often strategic, that loyalty is conditional, that meritocracy is largely myth, that your emotions are being targeted, that people around you may be manipulating you in ways you have not recognized, is not a light intellectual experience. It can produce, initially, a kind of disillusionment or sadness. That sadness is appropriate and worth sitting with. The pre-awareness world had a certain comforting quality, even if that comfort was purchased at the price of clarity. Naivety feels safe. Awareness can feel lonely. But here is what I want you to know. The awareness does not have to produce cynicism. Cynicism, the conclusion that everyone is primarily self-interested, that generosity is always manipulation, that nothing is genuine, is not the lesson of this book. It is, in fact, a kind of second naivety, a lazy, totalizing narrative that saves you from the difficult work of actually distinguishing good from bad, genuine from strategic, trustworthy from predatory. The lesson of this book is discernment, nuanced, patient, compassionate discernment, the ability to see clearly without losing warmth. To understand the game, without becoming a player who has forgotten it, is a game. To protect yourself without closing yourself, the 30 truths we have explored together are tools. Like all tools, they can be used well or poorly. Used well, they help you navigate a complex world with more clarity, build relationships with more genuine basis, protect yourself from exploitation, and contribute to environments that are more honest and more equitable. Used poorly, they become excuses for treating everyone as a suspect, for manipulating others with the techniques you have learned to recognize, for a sophisticated cynicism that looks like wisdom but is actually just well-dressed fear. I trust you to use them well. That trust is not naive. It is based on the fact that you read this far. People who read books about power dynamics and psychological manipulation to the end are almost never the predators. They are the thoughtful, the curious, the people trying to understand and navigate the world with more skill and integrity. Go do that. Build an internal world that no external pressure can fully govern. Cultivate relationships that are grounded in honesty and genuine mutual regard. Extend to others the compassionate discernment you now bring to yourself. You were never powerless. You were only, until now, less fully informed. Now you are not.